Well, this week, right here on Stirring a Bubbling Cauldron, you are going to meet an anomaly. Yes, I say perhaps even a cryptid. Might be hard to believe, but you have met perhaps the only witch in the world who hates Halloween. Now, I say that the ultimate witch not only has every right, but perhaps an obligation to hate Halloween, at least as its representation of Samhain, which it's not. Not even related, not even close. So, while I'm certainly offended by the old hag witch costumes and that protruding witch nose, I'm all in for a good costume party. I'm really game to knock on doors and get free candy even. But Halloween, as we know it today, is not a witch's holiday. Poor Halloween, though. It's become an abomination to its roots, a mere shadow of its once glorious self in the hands of, yes, the church, and now the church would even have it wiped from existence. But commercialism is the real culprit here, and commercialism will win because it's too big a moneymaker. It's an $8 billion, with a B, billion-dollar industry in the US alone every year that exploits and camouflages Samhain into a meaningless but fun party. Another deeply meaningful pagan tradition, hijacked and twisted. So, come September 31st, party on, my friend. Go ahead. Line the pockets of the consumer machine if you enjoy it. But do it because you simply enjoy it. Not because it's an expression of your pagan beliefs. Not to show support of the craft. Not as a representation of Samhain. So what should you do instead? Well, in addition to all the commercialism of Halloween, or even instead of it, I encourage you to do something that truly supports paganism with integrity. Embrace the actual pagan sabbat of Samhain. What an idea, right? Consider Samhain as something distinctly unique and separate from Halloween if you like, because it is. Yeah, the original is professed to be the same. Certain activities resemble one another on a somewhat superficial level, or totally superficial level, but not all the truly meaningful and useful parts were carried forward. In fact, very few of them. And those that were whitewashed and swept under the proverbial rug like dirt. Everyone knows what Halloween is all about. It's what is really, what's really known about Samhain, though? Even a lot of witches I know don't truly know that much about Samhain. They just love Halloween, and I get it. But let's talk about Samhain. The real Samhain, although that can be a little controversial as well, because we have to remember that most of what we know about Samhain, or anything for that matter, is proclaimed by those who wrote history. So this, the alleged oldest of the pagan traditions, is likely wrong. What we've been told about it is likely wrong. Like much of history, it was carried on through the centuries as an oral and experiential tradition. But because the church Christianized it, the written records of the events were recorded by the church scribes, and for the most part, may not be getting the full and accurate story here. From what we're told, Samhain, which is summer's end in Gaelic, is said to have occurred on the full moon closest to November 1st. And even today, this is considered the witch's new year. So, Happy New Year is upon us, and it's time for us to prepare. It is said to have been a time representing the Lord of Death, whose powers became so strong that it overtook the sun and led to the transition between the summer harvest time and the dark winter. Now, some accounts say that Samhain, the spirits of all who had died, would come forward. Those who had died the previous year would come forward and assemble and be released from the animal bodies that had been housing them as punishment for their evil deeds all year. Sounds a little churchy to me, but maybe, okay. They were then allowed to return to their former homes and visit the living on the eve of the festival of Samhain. These wandering spirits were hungry, so if you set out a treat for them, they would not trick or curse you. Other accounts say that the spirits of the dead were welcomed into those homes by leaving food out, their favorite foods, in fact, to attract them. And other spirits were welcomed at this time as well, with food offerings like elves and fairies and sprites and various kinds of wee folk. And all that was well and good, but not all the spirits who arrived were. Some spirits showed up from dark energies, and they were not so welcome. They also particularly longed to see the living one more time, and some of those spirits were even those of people who had been wronged and were returning for revenge. All this remembrance and reminiscing was wonderful until those angry ones arrived. Enter masks. Yep, it is said that the Samhain of ancient times also featured masks, or ash, which would be worn or put on the face to hide the person's identity. In this way, they could have the choice to only reveal themselves to the good spirits and not those who had perhaps come back for revenge. Samhain was a time of year when the veil was the thinnest, allowing the ghost to return to earth, not only to visit the loved ones, but also often causing havoc with crops and people's personal belongings. So, in addition to the ghostly wonders and the thin veils around Samhain, Samhain was also a fire festival. And some say the fires were there to help keep the ghosts away. But others reported a more sinister purpose. We may never actually know without our little time travel efforts that sometimes we do in remote viewing into the past, but interestingly, bonfires were once called bone fires, implying that they were, in fact, massive and hot enough to burn up even the bones of sacrifices. Well, some of these sacrifices were said to be both animal and human, and were also used to ward off the ghosts. But these bone fires, in my opinion, and the opinion of many, were much more likely to serve as a more sanitary way to dispose of the bones of the animals that had just been slaughtered, the ones that were being preserved, to feed people's families through the coming winter, as this was also a time of last harvest and Thanksgiving. So, thanks to this thinness of the veils, which is one of my favorite parts, thanks to the thinness of the veils between the world of the living and the world of the dead, it was also a time when the Druids, or the Celtic priests, would make prophecies, more accurate prophecies, and predictions, and various things that would help the future community, help with the community feel good about the future and know what's coming and kind of sustain them through that long winter. It was tradition that people would extinguish their home fires before the festival as well. And then after the festival, they would take some of the fire from the bonfire and relight their own hearths to sustain it from the winter. That strong, powerful bonfire would be carried into the home. So, a little more down the line, it was around 600 AD, and the church had had enough of this pagan tradition, but they couldn't seem to stop it. It was very powerful and very popular. So the Pope moved All Saints' Day, which was actually May 13th, to November 1st. and proclaimed it in honor of Mary and of all the saints. Well, of course, we know that the real purpose was to dilute and confuse the meaning of that more popular pagan festival, Samhain. And the term Halloween, the eve before the holy, was later coined by, yeah, you guessed it, the Catholic Church. So apparently, as a little more assurance that the events would be considered religious from here on out, they even added one more holiday to the season, which was November 2nd, to commemorate the faithful dead, as opposed to the evil dead? Yeah, I guess. Anyway, so that made the entire time between October 31st and November 2nd All Hallows Tide. Now, I don't know about you, but that's not a term I hear much today. But apparently it had some impact at the time. And this wasn't only a time of Samhain and for the witches' memory. Many cultures recognized this time of the year as a time when the veil was thin. The Jewish tradition of Yom Kippur typically occurs in October and is about saying prayers for the dead. In Mexico, we have Dia de los Muertos, the Day of the Dead. It's November 1st through November 2nd. And it's based on the belief that the dead return each year to visit the living, and it dates back over 3,000 years. Some say it was actually celebrated by the Aztecs. The Incas of Peru celebrate the Festival of the Dead for the entire month of November. The Ghost Festival is celebrated by Buddhists, and the Hindus hold many festivals at the same time, including those that honor Kali, the goddess of death and destruction. It's interesting to note that in many traditions throughout the world, from Mexico to the Far East, these celebrations of the dead have been likened to, or not likened, but linked. They're linked to the Pleiades star system, also called the Seven Sisters and the Great Eye of God. The Aztecs and the Mayan, among others, believed that the world had been destroyed and recreated no less than 4 times on just such a night. There are powerful stories from ancient cultures from Mexico to the Far East, telling of death and destruction linked to this time when, at midnight, the constellation of the Pleiades reaches its highest point in the sky. And at that time, it was around November 1st. Now today, as we know, things shift, and it's closer to around November 20th. But significant just the same. Now, while the roots of this festival are obviously older than the Druids, and the Celts for that matter, in America, the celebration of the dead had a really slow start, thanks to the Puritans and the belief of those people. But soon, it became a public event once more, and they had play parties to celebrate the harvest, and to tell stories of the dead, and tell fortunes, and dance and sing. It was a prank night as well. A lot of mischief occurred on that night that didn't go over very well with those in charge. But it wasn't until the 19th century, when America was flooded by the immigrants, especially the millions of Irish after the Irish potato famine, that really popularized Halloween across the nation. So if you love Halloween, in America at least, perhaps you need to thank the Irish. Now in the 20s and through the 50s, we had a revival of the trick-or-treating. And that got communities more involved and away from the idea of ghosts. At least that was the idea. They'd had enough, again, of people connecting this holiday event with ghosts and pranks and witchcraft. In comes candy. So it was kind of a bribe to the kids to get them to not prank them and cause mischief. Kind of like the old days. Okay, maybe that carried forward a bit, only now we're bribing the kids instead of bribing the ghosts. So even back in England, All Souls Day, November 2nd, soul cakes were given out to the poor in exchange for their promises to pray for the families, the dead relatives' families. Oh, no, the family's dead relatives. Let me get that right. So there's a very long history of bribery tied to this. And the church liked it because it encouraged replacing leaving food and wine for the roaming spirits. They much preferred you give candy to kids than food and wine to spirits. So today, a quarter of all the candy bought every year is bought at Halloween, at least in the US. And it's become, like I said earlier, an $8 billion annual industry, second only to Christmas. That should be a reason alone enough for me to avoid it. I can appreciate some of the world traditions of this time far more than the American ones, but no matter where you are or where you live, instead of contributing to the vast commercialism, consider that if ghosts come back to the earth at this time, maybe you want to just sit in the dark and commune with them. Or put on a mask so they can avoid you, although I'm really not sure that helps. Maybe they'll leave you alone, but I think they can see through that. The kids trick-or-treating may find it a little odd, though, to see you sitting in the dark talking to the ghosts. But hey, maybe they'll think you're a prop. Maybe skip the avoidance and just set another plate for dinner and welcome those ghosts back for a visit. Then, when you're done visiting and having a good old time, take them back to the spirit world, either in ceremony or, heck, if you live close to the cemetery, drive them on back there. It's a great opportunity to acquire a little vial of graveyard dirt while you're there. So go ahead. Scare away those evil spirits with a jack-o'-lantern. That actually came from the legend of Stingy Jack, who outwitted the devil. Now, he forced the devil to agree that he couldn't take him to hell when he died, but since he also couldn't get into heaven, well, he ended up roaming the darkness, just carrying a flame in a hollowed-out turnip to light his path. Now, the turnip turned into a pumpkin. Probably at midnight. Most things turn into pumpkins at midnight, don't they? I think I actually prefer the turnip, though. After all, what else are you going to do with a damn turnip anyway? Certainly don't want to eat the thing. According to John Pinette, the comedian, God even buried the turnip in hopes of disposing of it, but we keep digging it up. So I'll tell you, if I come back to haunt you, use a turnip, because I'm definitely not coming to your house for dinner. Anyway, Halloween, interestingly, was also a time for husband hunting. So this is a good tradition to keep alive, perhaps. I don't know if you want a husband, or maybe it's a time to get rid of one. Not sure. But they used to toss apple peels over their shoulder, hoping that they would land and reveal their mate's initials. Scrying was also used to try and see their husband's face. And maybe the next time you bob for apples, remember that this was also used as a tool for husband hunting. Oh, here's a good one. They wrote the names of prospective husbands on hazelnuts and tossed them into the fire. Now, the ones that burned up were not good prospects. Instead, they were told to go for the ones that pop open and reveal the prize. I know I always prefer to pre-screen with a performance test. So, for a more modern-day tradition, I suggest starting with that. It's more fun anyway. So, if no husband was found by age 20, they became old maids who hung out with black cats the rest of their days and were accused of witchcraft. Yeah, So, if their man-hunting spells didn't work, they were accused of witchcraft? Well, that's a bit ironic. But on a serious note, the Witch's New Year is considered the most powerful night to perform magic. So don't let it pass you by. It's also considered the best night for divination, like scrying and dowsing or tea leaf reading, because the veil is so thin at that time. If you're having a party, though, you might want to write a few messages on like walnut shells like they used to do with milk. Heat them over the fire, and the milk browns just enough to mystically reveal the message. So that's kind of fun. Beats passing out candy. Releasing things that no longer serve you is also a good thing at this time, and connects with that cycle of winter and dying and letting things pass. Down to practical matters for Samhain and the Witch's New Year. What day should you celebrate it on? Well, as with all magic, there's a bit of leeway here. So choose whatever works best for you. It's your ritual. But, you can certainly do it on October 31st, even though the world calls it Halloween. But if you have small children, you might opt for a more traditional day so that you can continue to participate in those modern events and gatherings without interfering with the more sacred rituals of Samhain. Now, in the Druid and Celtic tradition, it was the first full moon closest to November, which in 2021 is officially October 20th. This may be a good choice, with the added bonus of it being in sync with the lunar cycle. And it's also actually the peak of the Orionid meteor shower, so that's kind of a cool addition. It's okay, though, to push it to the weekend if that fits your lifestyle a bit better. For many, even the weekend, though, in this case is not much help, because for that week or so, prior to Halloween, tends to be really busy, especially if you have young children or big plans and activities happening for the commercial Halloween. I tend to want to be more reflective. I want time to spend on my Samhain rituals and ceremonies, so I personally celebrate Samhain after Halloween. It just makes life easier for me. Personally, I welcome the Witch's New Year on the full moon after November 21st, which is also happens this year to be a very rare partial lunar eclipse. But November 19th is also personally significant for me in other ways. So that's another factor in my choice. It's Thanksgiving week, which seems somehow appropriate, and it's the week of my birthday. I typically spend that week, because of Thanksgiving and the kids being off school, deep among the redwoods, camping with not another light in sight except for the celestial display, so it's perfect for me. And in addition, that's also the time when my personal favorite constellation, the Pleiades, is highest in the midnight sky. This is not insignificant. Not for me, and certainly not for the ancients. This placement of the Pleiades in the sky, as I mentioned earlier, was considered by the ancient Incas and Aztecs to be the point when the veil in the worlds was at its absolute thinnest. Have you ever been asked what you see when you look into the night sky? Well, my answer is my ancestors, because my galactic ancestors are the Pleiadians. And if you haven't met yours, maybe it's time. So this was just too many synchronicities for me to deny that, for me at least, November 19th is the perfect time for my ritual. What's yours? Tell me. Tell me your plans for celebrating Samhain and when. But whatever date you choose, consider adopting one of my personal favorite Samhain rituals. Focused on connecting in a deep way with the ancestors, with your ancestors. Once that initial connection is made, your ancestors can continue to be a source of power and support and inspiration for you throughout the rest of the year. It truly creates the Witch's New Year. Then you can renew it in a deep way annually on Samhain. And after that, it really and truly becomes a cherished annual reunion with those ancestors that you've made deep connections with. You can laugh and share together, creating and deepening bonds. Not a time when you're asking for things necessarily. You're just enjoying one another's company and creating those meaningful relationships with them. I'll definitely share some of the details of my rituals. I know they'll spark some ideas for you in the next episodes. But because the topic of connecting with your ancestors is far too deep and powerful to cover in the limited time we have left in this episode, it's going to wait. But I won't forget, it's coming. There is great power here, not only for wisdom and support, but for deep healing of personal and generational trauma. Let those generational traumas end with us. But to do that, we have to clear them. We have to consciously and ceremonially recognize, make the decision, and choose to clear them. So, we'll spend some quality time on this next week. Until then, give some thought to the ancestors you may want or need to connect with. Remember, your ancestors are not only linked to your parents through genealogy, but you also have connections to ancestors through links to your DNA, your Akashic ancestors from various previous lifetimes, and even galactic ancestors. So think about what kind of healing you want to do for yourself, for your family, or your entire race, or any entire race that you may have been linked to on some level in the past, even to the earth herself, because you have ancestral links there too. So, until next week, live using and believing in the power of magic.